The Philadelphia Eagles just won the Super Bowl again, and they did it without tanking. If you're watching this video, there's a 1000% chance you already know what tanking is, whether it's resting your best players down the stretch or trading away your team's superstar in a move that doesn't really make that much sense. Tanking is one of those I know it when I see it type things. To tank is to fail for the greater good. But how good is it really? We know tanking isn't something that the players do. I mean, let's think about it. Most of the players on a team could be traded or cut or shipped out on a moment's notice, and especially if they're intentionally losing. Tanking is a management or team front office decision. But spoiler alert, tanking doesn't work. Some would say tanking's been around since the beginning of sports, but we can point to clear tanking for at least the last 40 years. And while you could give me a handful of teams that have successfully tanked, a la the 1983 Houston Rockets that finished dead last in the NBA's Western Conference, in order to then draft first ballot future Hall of Famer Hakeem Olajuwon the next year, I guess that tanking worked. Or coincidentally, also in 1983, when the Pittsburgh Penguins tanked for the perennial second greatest player of all time, Mario Lemieux. The list of successful tank jobs ends right about there. The much more common outcome is years of awful play on the field or court or rink, fan satisfaction in the dumps, and entire generations of potential talent wasted. So the question persists. If tanking doesn't work, why are teams still trying it today? And if tanking doesn't work, then what's the actual solution for teams trying to turn their fortunes around? Well, let's talk about it. First things first, of the big four US sports, the annual draft's importance for the MLB and NHL is really nothing like the weight of the NBA and NFL drafts. So I'll be limiting this breakdown to those two leagues. And it's not a coincidence that in those two leagues, many of us have been conditioned to accept tanking as just a natural part of the game. Like in the NFL, the most obvious example of tanking came in the last week of the 2014 regular season. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers were leading their final game of the year 20-7 at halftime. Sounds normal until you realize that just one more loss would have clinched the #1 overall draft pick for the following season. Suffice it to say, the team benched all of their starters in the second half and intentionally lost the game to their hated rival, the New Orleans Saints. Tank job accomplished. Or how about 10 years later? Former Dolphins head coach Brian Flores would go on to sue the entire NFL and his former team, stating that he was fired because he wouldn't go along with the team owner's instruction to tank and intentionally lose games. Add in stories like the accusations against the 2011 Colts and intentionally tanking for the first overall draft pick to draft quarterback Andrew Luck, suck for luck, which is absolutely crazy. Or the Cleveland Browns winning one game over the span of 2 full seasons, and the signs of tanking are written all over the wall. You can't deny that it has happened. But is this a winning recipe?
Just win, baby.
Well, let's look at the teams that do have the winning recipe in the league. For some reason, we seem to think winning is more of a luck thing, no pun intended, rather than the intentional results of intentional processes. So let's look at the winningest teams in the NFL over the last 10 years. And over the last 10 seasons, the most winningest teams in the league are the New England Patriots, Pittsburgh Steelers, Philadelphia Eagles, Buffalo Bills, and the Kansas City Chiefs, of course. What do all of these teams share in common? And no, let's really think about it, and not just on the surface level. Yes, they've all had their fair share of great high-level quarterbacks, but it's deeper than the surface of it. When many people argue for tanking, they point to perks like young players on cheaper contracts, or prioritizing long-term success over the chase for short-term winning. And while this may seem like a logical choice, it overlooks one key consideration we lose sight of in these debates. You can do both. It's possible to win now and set up your team for future success at the same time. Now, this might sound like wishful thinking, and it may be a gross simplification of the process towards winning in the NFL, but at the core of all success in the league, it requires two key things: risk and talent. To evaluate risk and talent, let's go deeper on those champion Philadelphia Eagles. Good plan. The Super Bowl winning Eagles were led by their MVP winning quarterback, Jalen Hurts. Now, on the surface, the story of Jalen Hurts is nothing extraordinary. Four-star recruit out of high school, drafted from an SEC Big 12 powerhouse, multi-year starter that finally won the big one. It's not until we peel back the layers of context and see that Hurts was drafted in the second round by general manager Howie Roseman while the Eagles already had a starting quarterback. And not just any QB, but one that was on a 4-year, $128 million contract. A very, very, very risky move that at the time had many fans hot at those that made the decision. 5 years later, and the selection looks like pure genius from the man in charge. But we know that wins aren't just a quarterback stat. There were many risks taken by the Eagles to put the team at the top of the league. See, those same Eagles had just fired their Super Bowl winning coach 3 years after winning the big one. First Super Bowl win in team history, by the way. And that was another choice that baffled supporters at the time. Ultimately, the team used its resources to find and develop talent at the best of its ability, with plenty of risk along the way. Speaking of talent and risk, no other team has held up those pillars as well as the former Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. Not a surprise, they're also the most winningest team over the last decade. See, in 2017, the Chiefs used their first-round draft pick on a quarterback from Texas Tech. But similar to those Eagles, the Chiefs already had a quarterback in the veteran Alex Smith, the former #1 overall pick. Smith had already been in the league for 13 years, and at the time, he had just led the team to 3 playoff seasons in the last 4 years. Smith was the right choice. Smith was the safe choice. But ultimately, the Hall of Fame coach Andy Reid decided to take a risk. He would bench Alex Smith for the young Patrick Mahomes, and 8 years later, with 5 Super Bowl visits to his name, the team is primed for generations of success to come. These same types of risks can be attributed to the other elite teams in the NFL for the last decade, like the New England Patriots, that trusted their entire franchise to a 6th-round draft pick at quarterback. That draft pick will go on to become the GOAT and lead the team to 6 Super Bowl titles. Or the Pittsburgh Steelers, hiring an inexperienced head coach that had only been an NFL coordinator for 1 season. That same coach will go on to take the team to 18 straight winning seasons, the most by any coach to ever start a career. Every team in the NFL has the same chances to take these risks. But for some teams, the road to success seems much steeper and inaccessible. Some teams seem to hire the same 4 coaches that get fired by other teams, or draft the same archetypes of players stuck in the 20th century. Why do these teams that opt to tank not meet the same types of success as those risky teams? Let's take a look at some examples. Remember those Buccaneers we talked about earlier that intentionally lost their last game of the season for the #1 pick? They will go on to draft one Jameis Winston as their franchise's savior. After a legendary college career where he won the Heisman Trophy, BCS National Championship, and broke all the records he could, the team would still be drenched in mediocrity and go another 4 years before even making the playoffs. It wouldn't be until the team took a risk and brought on a 42-year-old quarterback that they would see any serious big-time success. But what about the suck for luck Colts? Which is still crazy, by the way. They made the playoffs 3 straight years with luck on their side after going 2-14 before he came to the team. They made a big risk by letting their MVP quarterback walk away from the team in favor of an unproven rookie with loads of upside. They sought out the talent in coaching and on the field in order to chase that ultimate prize, but it didn't work out. So maybe there's more to the equation and how to win in these leagues without the tanking game. To answer that, we take a look at the NBA, where many say tanking first took root in the US. The NBA is notorious for tanking, and these days, as soon as the All-Star break rolls around, fans call for any team out of the playoff mix to pull the plug and pray for a top pick. But refer to the spoiler at the front. It doesn't work like that. Take a look at the list of teams that have won an NBA title over the last 20 to 25 years, and you'll see that not a single one of those teams got there by pulling the plug on the season, tanking for a high draft pick superstar, and winning the title. We know that you do need a superstar to win a title in the NBA, unless you're the Detroit Pistons. But it doesn't work that easily. You have to play the game the right way. Now, some will hear this spiel and think, oh, well, the Spurs tanked for Tim Duncan and they won the title. But what about them? And to that, I say, okay, let's talk about it. In 1987, the Spurs drafted future first ballot Hall of Famer, the Admiral, David Robinson, with the first overall draft pick. Now, the Spurs didn't tank for this pick, as that campaign was actually only their 3rd losing season since the creation. The team was good, but just couldn't get over the hump. For 10 years, they found themselves seemingly just a piece or two away from the big dance. Then, in 1996, their star man David Robinson would get injured and miss all but 6 games of the season. That injury luck, along with the aging of star role players like Vinny Del Negro, Avery Johnson, led the team to plummet from their usual level. The team would finish bottom 3 in the standings, and the draft lottery granted them rights to the #1 overall pick in 1997. One, Tim Duncan, the big fundamental. Duncan would slot in as the Rookie of the Year, and then 1 year later lead his team to win Finals MVP, bringing the first ever championship to San Antonio. The Spurs would win 5 championships over the next 2 decades and cement themselves in NBA history. So, what's different from the Spurs and say the Philadelphia 76ers and the process? The difference, as simple and as plain as I can put it, is that the Spurs actually prioritized winning. Now, while it can be easy to point to that #1 overall pick in 97 and the championship in 99 and think the message is clear, when you tell the story of the Spurs, you can't overlook the team making the playoffs in 21 of the first 25 seasons before they won it all. Compare that with the process 76ers of the late 2010s, and we see a rookie Ben Simmons join a team that finished at the bottom of the conference for 4 straight seasons. By the time the team was competitive on a league-wide scale nearly a decade later, there was already an acceptance of mediocrity that actually hindered the team and set the ceiling far below what it should have been. While the 76ers decided to hope for the best and keep around the same coach that won fewer than 20 games for 3 seasons in a row, the Spurs, on the other hand, would go through 6 coaches in 6 years until they found the best fit for long-term success. That kind of move was certainly risky, but it was the type of action that indicated the team was really serious about winning. And the results paid off more than 5-fold 20 years later. So, with all that being said, why are teams still tanking in the year of our Lord 2025? The logic behind the choice might seem reasonable. The value of a rookie contract is immense in securing high-level talent at a significantly cheaper margin than a starting level player on a 2nd, 3rd, or 4th contract. Those cheaper contracts then allow teams to pair young players with high-level superstar talent, with the ultimate goal in sight of winning it all come June. But history has shown that it's not that easy. Since draft success is based on so much more than just a scout's evaluation, we have to consider things like player fit, team scheme, morale, and chemistry to all work in tandem to turn a good draft pick into a highly successful team. And while the high-level success of teams like the Bucks and Nuggets may seem like random anomalies, one pathway to success for small market teams fighting mediocrity is to go deep in the weeds and look for the best budding international stars to carry their teams far. In a time that feels like generations ago, honestly, the Bucks found future Hall of Famer Giannis Antetokounmpo before anyone ever knew he'd be a multi-time MVP. And the Nuggets drafted potential GOAT Nikola Jokic in the 2nd round from Serbia before anyone knew how great he'd actually be. To pull this off, teams have to be willing to strategically take risks and have the tools to develop talent. But even for teams that don't stumble across unicorns, the Toronto Raptors show the model for how to take that leap from contender to champion. The Raptors consistently were a high-level team in the NBA, finishing at the top of the division and making the playoffs for 5 years in a row. But to take that leap, they needed to take a risk. They fired the reigning Coach of the Year and promoted an assistant that had never served as an NBA head coach. They brought on a former Finals MVP and future Hall of Famer Kawhi Leonard and went from good to great, winning their first ever NBA championship in 2019. The recipe is simple, but not easy. Tanking is not the answer. You won't go from broke to bespoke by intentionally tanking and hoping to stumble into greatness. In order to win, you have to be willing to take risks and develop talent and be committed to winning. Just try it, and maybe you'll find yourself at the top of the mountain when it's all said and done. But if not, it's not about wins and losses, but the memories we made along the way. Thanks for watching. Until next time, peace.